At 3:17 on Christmas afternoon, Dad texted our family chat. "Don't come to dinner tonight. Ryan's new wife says you'll ruin the whole party." Ryan followed with, "She can't stand the smell of a loser." I didn't defend myself. I posted the blurry photo I'd taken 2 weeks earlier, then added Audrey and Kelsey, the woman standing too close to my brother in that picture. By 6, Audrey was asking why Kelsey thought Ryan's wedding had been canceled. Then Ryan typed one sentence that froze me. "You did this when Mom was dying too." I had no idea what he meant. If you've ever been blamed for telling the truth instead of the lie that caused the damage, stay with me. 2 weeks earlier, I had not been looking for anything. I had left work early on a gray Friday afternoon, stopped downtown for a Christmas gift, and cut through the lobby of a boutique hotel because the wind had turned sharp. I was halfway past the front windows when I saw Ryan outside beneath the awning. My brother was easy to recognize even from behind. He wore the same navy coat he had worn to his rehearsal dinner. The woman beside him was not Audrey. She was laughing, her face turned up toward his, while Ryan's hand rested low on her back with the quiet familiarity of a man who had placed it there many times before. I stopped behind the glass. Maybe there were innocent explanations for individual gestures. I knew that. I had spent enough years in my family being accused of overreacting that I had trained myself to argue against my own instincts. Then the woman brushed something from Ryan's lapel, and he bent toward her in a way that made the space between them look private. I took out my phone and snapped one picture through the glass. It was terrible. The camera focused on white lights reflected in the window, leaving Ryan and the woman soft at the edges. I could tell it was my brother because I had been standing there. Anyone else could have called it uncertain. I did not send it to Audrey. Ryan had married her only 6 weeks earlier, and I had no desire to blow apart a marriage based on a blurry photograph. That evening, I called him. I told him where I had seen him, and described the woman. He said her name was Kelsey Hart, and that she was a business contact. When I mentioned his hand on her back, his tone changed. He stopped explaining Kelsey, and started explaining me. I was suspicious. I was bored. I was too interested in his life. I had always needed a reason to think the worst of him. Instead of taking the bait, I asked why he sounded more worried about what I might tell Audrey than about what I had actually seen. There was a pause. Then Ryan told me to stay out of his marriage and hung up. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I searched his public business page. Kelsey appeared in a photograph from an industry mixer months earlier. Same face, same dark hair, same narrow gold hoop earrings I remembered beneath the hotel awning. Her public profile was linked there, but I did nothing with it. I closed the page because I still did not have proof. I did not know yet what Ryan had told Audrey about that call, but over the next 2 weeks, I began seeing the effect. Over the next 2 weeks, Audrey became cooler in small ways. A reaction disappeared from a family post. A question about what I was bringing to Christmas went unanswered. Dad mentioned once that Audrey was nervous about everyone getting along. When I pressed him, he said Ryan had warned her that I was jealous of his marriage, bitter, and always looking for a reason to create drama around family events. Dad also said Audrey had asked whether I could sit Christmas out if I planned to bring accusations about Kelsey to the table. I asked if that request had really come from Audrey. He said it had. I did not call her. At the time, all I had was Dad's summary and Ryan's defensiveness, and distance had become my safest habit with my family. Christmas morning passed quietly in my apartment. I wrapped the bottle of bourbon I had bought Dad, left Ryan and Audrey's gift bag by the door, and spent too long deciding whether the green sweater I had chosen looked festive or desperate. At 32, I hated that family gatherings could still make me feel 16. Dinner was supposed to start at 5:30. Then my phone buzzed. Our old messenger group was just Dad, Ryan, and me. A leftover thread from grocery lists, airport pickups, and birthday reminders. Audrey had never been added after the wedding. Dad wrote, "Don't come to Christmas dinner tonight. Your younger brother's new wife says you'll ruin the whole party." I read it twice. The first time, I felt embarrassed. The second time, angry. Before I could decide whether to call him, Ryan added, "She can't stand the smell of a loser." I stared at the screen until the words stopped looking like language. Loser was an old word in our family, usually dressed in nicer clothes. Difficult, unsettled, too sensitive, too stubborn. I had a decent job, paid my own bills, and had stopped asking anyone in my family to admire the life I had built. None of that mattered. Ryan knew exactly which bruise he was pressing. My fingers went to the keyboard. I could have reminded Dad that I had bought his gift, demanded to know why a woman who had been in our family 6 weeks now had veto power over whether I sat at Christmas dinner, or defended every choice I had made since I was 22. I deleted the first word. I didn't argue. Instead, I opened my photos and selected the blurry picture. For several seconds, my thumb hovered over send. I knew what I was doing was not noble. I was not thinking, "Audrey deserves the truth." I was thinking, "You wanted me humiliated in front of the family? Fine. Let's stop pretending I'm the embarrassing thing in this room." I sent it. Then I opened the group settings. Audrey's name came up immediately because we were already connected on Facebook. I found Kelsey's public profile from the business page and added her too. Exactly 2 women. Audrey reacted first. "Who is Kelsey?" Less than a minute later, Kelsey replied, "Who is Audrey?" Ryan wrote my name in capital letters and told me to remove Kelsey. I didn't touch anything. Audrey identified herself as Ryan's wife. There was a longer pause before Kelsey answered. "What do you mean, wife?" At that point, the conversation stopped feeling like revenge and started feeling like a floor giving way. Audrey wrote that she and Ryan had married 6 weeks earlier. Kelsey replied that Ryan had told her the wedding had been canceled because the engagement was over. He had said his family did not know the full story yet, so he still had to appear at a few family events until everything settled down. A notification flashed from Audrey. "He's calling me now." Seconds later, Kelsey wrote, "Me too." Ryan tried to pull the conversation apart. He told Audrey they needed to speak privately. He told Kelsey to stop responding. Then he told Dad that I had set the whole thing up. But Audrey and Kelsey were now in the same place, looking at 2 versions of the same 6 weeks. By 6 o'clock, my phone would not stop vibrating. Audrey went silent. Kelsey wrote one final message, saying she had never known he was married, then stopped answering. Dad asked why I had done this in the family chat. Ryan demanded to know what I had told Kelsey before adding her, as if I had coached 2 women into discovering his lies. I sat on the edge of my couch, still wearing the green sweater I had chosen for a dinner I was no longer allowed to attend. Their Christmas gifts waited beside the door. Then Ryan called. I answered, and before I could say a word, he screamed, "How could you do this to your own family?" For one sharp, ugly second, I smiled. When I ended the call, Dad had written, "There was no reason to do this in front of everyone." Not why did Ryan lie to his wife? Not is Kelsey telling the truth? My method had already become the emergency. The old feeling returned so fast it tightened my stomach, the sense that whatever happened, the final problem would somehow become the fact that I had refused to carry it quietly. A minute later, Ryan sent one more message. "You always do this." I stared at those 4 words longer than everything else he had written that day. Always? I had no idea what he meant. The first thing I learned after the group went quiet was that silence could be louder than all those messages. Ryan called me 3 times before 7. I let the first 2 go to voicemail. On the third, I answered because I wanted to know whether Audrey was safe, not because I wanted to hear another version of why his choices were somehow mine. His voice was raw. Audrey had left the house with an overnight bag and would not answer him. He said she had gone to stay somewhere else for a while, but he did not know where. Kelsey had stopped responding too. Within a few hours, the 2 relationships Ryan had kept carefully separated had both moved beyond his control. He kept circling back to the same complaint. I had blindsided him, embarrassed Audrey, and destroyed Christmas. I listened long enough to understand that he had nothing useful to tell me about Audrey. then said I was not going to help him manage what happened next. He called me vicious. I ended the call. By 8, Dad called. His house should have been full of Christmas dinner by then. Roast, potatoes, the ridiculous cranberry dish he made once a year because Mom used to insist on it. Instead, I could hear a television murmuring somewhere behind him and the occasional clink of dishes being moved around. He did not ask whether I was all right after being told not to come. He did not ask what Ryan had told Kelsey or why a woman believed his wedding had been canceled 6 weeks after it happened. He started with Audrey. She had been humiliated, he said. She had walked out in tears. Christmas had turned into a disaster. I asked him one question. Did you ask Ryan if he cheated? Dad exhaled, as if I were making the conversation harder than it needed to be. He said Ryan had a lot to answer for, but that did not make what I had done right. 2 wrongs did not make a right. There had been no reason to put Audrey's pain in front of everyone. The irritating part was that he was not completely wrong. I had known, even before I pressed send, that I was not acting out of pure concern for Audrey. I had wanted Ryan to feel exposed after he exposed me as the family loser. But Dad's emphasis still landed strangely. Ryan had lied to his wife and to Kelsey for months. I had made the lies collide in a messenger thread. Yet the emergency Dad seemed most able to discuss was the location where the truth had appeared. I told him that if Audrey had asked me not to attend because Ryan convinced her I was dangerous to their marriage, then maybe he should be asking why Ryan needed me, kept away from her in the first place. Dad said I was turning everything into a courtroom. That was one of his favorite phrases whenever I asked for details he did not want to give. He told me families survived by knowing when not to make the worst moment even worse. That sentence stayed with me after the call ended. Not because it was new, because it was familiar. Around 9:30, Ryan sent me a direct message instead of using the group. He told me Audrey still would not pick up. Then came another paragraph about the picture, about Kelsey, about how I had waited until Christmas because I wanted an audience. I nearly ignored it. Then he wrote, "You always take something painful and make it worse." I typed back, "You keep saying always." "What are you talking about?" His answer came so quickly that I knew he had not invented it in that moment. Mom. For a few seconds, I just looked at the word. 10 Christmases had passed since she died, but there were parts of that year I still avoided touching too directly. Her scarf stayed in a cedar box at Dad's house. I could still remember the smell of unscented hospital lotion on her hands and the way her wedding ring had become loose near the end. I also remembered arguments, real ones. Ryan had been 19 and furious at the idea that wanting more treatment might not be the same thing as saving her. I had been 22 and exhausted enough to say things with more force than tenderness. None of that was a secret between us. Ryan wrote, "You did it when Mom was dying too." I sat up straighter on the couch. What exactly did I do? You took the worst moment of our lives and decided you were the only one who could handle the truth. I felt anger arrive before memory did. Mom had metastatic ovarian cancer. By the final stretch, treatment had taken more from her than it was giving back. She had been clear that she did not want another aggressive round, just because the rest of us were terrified of losing her. She had chosen comfort-focused care. I had not invented that choice. I had not possessed some secret authority over her life. I had helped make calls and had argued with Ryan when he kept treating acceptance like betrayal, but the decision was Mom's. So, I wrote the simplest thing I knew to be true. Mom chose hospice. Ryan answered. After you kept pushing it, I stared at the message, suddenly cold despite the heat running in my apartment. That was not how I remembered it. I remembered Mom already knowing what she wanted. I remembered Ryan refusing to hear her. I remembered Dad overwhelmed, quiet, moving through the house like every room had become too small for him. I remembered being the one who made practical calls because somebody had to. I also remembered saying things to Ryan I regretted. Once, when he accused us of giving up, I told him Mom did not owe him another treatment just because he was afraid to say goodbye. I had watched his face change after I said it, and had known even then that I had gone too far. But pushing Mom into hospice? That was different. I wrote, "Dad knew what Mom wanted." Ryan sent back, "Dad tried to stop you." Everything in me went still. I read the sentence again, then a third time. It was not just an accusation about my tone, or about how quickly I had moved once Mom made her decision. Ryan was describing a completely different structure. Dad on one side, me on the other. Dad trying to slow me down. Me forcing something forward. That was not my memory. I called Dad immediately. He picked up on the fourth ring, sounding tired. I did not mention Audrey. I did not mention Kelsey. I said Ryan had just told me that Dad tried to stop me when Mom went into hospice, and I wanted to know what he meant. The pause on Dad's end was longer than it should have been. Then he said, "Not tonight, Mara." I asked, why not tonight? Christmas had already been destroyed, according to him. What exactly was one factual answer going to damage now? Dad said Ryan was already falling apart and that I needed to leave my mother out of this. He said grief made people remember things differently. I asked whether he had ever told Ryan that he had tried to stop me. He did not answer. Instead, he said, "Your brother is already dealing with enough." That was when the conversation changed for me. Until then, I had been angry about a family pattern I thought I understood. Ryan did something wrong. Dad worried about peace, and I became the person accused of making everything uglier. But Dad's refusal was not about peace anymore. I had asked a yes or no question about something that happened 10 years earlier, and he was protecting the answer. I told him I was not asking him to relive Mom's last days. I was asking what Ryan believed because of something Dad had said. He told me to let it go for the night. I hung up before he could tell me I was being difficult. For the first time since the group chat exploded, I stopped thinking about Ryan's marriage. The blurry photograph, Audrey's silence, Kelsey's final message, all of it moved to the edge of the frame. There was suddenly another question in the center, one I had not known enough to ask for 10 years. What story had Ryan been living inside? At 11:06 p.m., I opened our direct thread and typed, "Tomorrow, tell me exactly what Dad told you about Mom. Not what you think happened, what he told you." I read it once, then sent it. Ryan did not answer that night. But I no longer needed him to answer immediately. I finally knew where the crack was. Ryan answered at 8:14 the next morning. Not with an apology, and not with another argument about Audrey. He sent an address for a coffee shop, halfway between our apartments, and wrote, 11. If you want to talk about Mom, talk about Mom. I almost laughed at the condition. For 10 years, Mom had been the one subject our family could use against me, whenever convenient, and then declare too painful the moment I asked for specifics. Still, I went. By the time I arrived, Christmas decorations were already starting to look tired in daylight. Ryan sat in the back corner with a paper cup he had barely touched. He looked as if he had slept in his clothes. I did not ask about Audrey. He did not offer. Before I sat down, I told him I was not there to discuss the photo, Kelsey, or whether I had ruined Christmas. I wanted one thing, the version of Mom's last weeks he believed, and I wanted to know where Dad fit into it. Ryan's expression hardened, but he nodded. What followed was not a story I recognized, though almost every individual piece inside it was familiar. In Ryan's memory, Mom had been exhausted and scared, but not finished fighting. Her oncologist had explained that another round of treatment might offer limited benefit, and Ryan had seized on the word might as if it were a promise. I had focused on the other half, the side effects, the hospital stays, the pain, the fact that Mom had started saying she wanted to be home. Ryan remembered me talking about quality of life before he was ready to hear the phrase. He remembered me using the word hospice first in front of him. He remembered me saying that forcing Mom through more treatment for our sake would be selfish. Those memories were real enough to hurt. He also remembered me making calls. I had contacted the hospice intake office after Mom said she wanted to hear what home care would actually look like. I had written down questions. I had told Ryan that a consultation was not the same thing as dragging her into a decision. Later, when he kept insisting there had to be another doctor, another trial, another option, I had told him he needed to stop treating Mom's fear of more treatment like a failure of character. Ryan had compressed all of that into a simpler chain. Mom was wavering. I pushed. Dad wanted us to slow down. I took over. Hospice happened. "That's what you think happened?" I asked. "That's what happened." His certainty irritated me, but it also frightened me. It would have been easier if his version had been obviously invented. It was not. He had taken true scenes and connected them with a line I did not recognize. I asked where Dad had tried to stop me. Ryan looked at me as if the answer should have been obvious. He said Dad kept asking for more time. Dad had wanted everyone to calm down before making anything permanent. According to Ryan, Dad thought I was moving too fast because I had already decided that more treatment was cruel. I asked whether he remembered Dad saying those things while Mom was still making the decision, or whether he remembered them later. That question changed his face. "Both," he said at first. Then he looked down at his cup. I waited. He finally said the clearest part came after the funeral. Dad had sat with him late one night when the house still smelled like flowers people had sent. Ryan had asked why everything had happened so quickly. Dad told him he had wanted more time, but I had already taken over the hospice arrangements and pushed things forward. Ryan could not quote every sentence after 10 years, but he remembered the meaning because he had built the next decade around it. Dad had been trying to hold on. I had been the one insisting everyone accept the end. I felt something inside me shift, not certainty exactly, but the direction of my doubt. For years, I had assumed Ryan's anger came from being 19, terrified, and unable to forgive me for saying the words he did not want to hear. I had thought Dad's silence merely allowed that resentment to harden. Sitting across from Ryan, I realized Dad might have done more than stay silent. He might have given Ryan the frame. I asked Ryan if Dad had ever told him Mom herself had asked about hospice before I started making calls. Ryan said Mom had talked about being tired. To him, that was not the same thing. I asked if Dad had ever told him Mom had made the decision herself. He became defensive again. "You were in her ear every day." The phrase hit because I knew exactly why he could believe it. I had been hard on him. There was no point pretending otherwise. I remembered standing in Dad's kitchen while Ryan paced between the table and the sink, insisting Mom could not stop treatment when there were still options to ask about. I had told him Mom did not owe us another round of chemo just because we were afraid to say goodbye. The sentence had been true in substance and brutal in delivery. I had watched him flinch, and instead of softening, I had kept going because I was angry that Mom's body had become the battlefield for everyone else's terror. I remembered another day when Ryan tried to reopen the treatment question after Mom had already said she wanted to meet with hospice. I had stepped between him and the bedroom door and told him not to make her defend the same decision again while she was exhausted. He had called me controlling. I had told him someone had to be the adult. At 22, grief had made me efficient before it made me kind. Sitting in the coffee shop 10 years later, I could admit that without accepting Ryan's whole story. Maybe my certainty had made everything feel faster to him. Maybe my anger had made him hear pressure where Mom had intended choice. Maybe I had contributed to the way he remembered that week, but there was still a piece that would not fit. Dad had not looked like a man fighting me. The memory came back in fragments at first. A dim hallway, the television off, a legal pad on the dining table covered in phone numbers. Mom had gone to lie down. Ryan had left the house furious. Dad stood near the kitchen doorway, with both hands pressed against the counter. I could not remember every word he used, but I remembered the weight of what he asked from me. "She means it this time. Help me." For years, I had stored that moment under the broad category of things that happened when Mom was dying, too painful and too crowded to examine. Now it stood apart. Ryan watched me go quiet. "What?" I told him I remembered Dad asking me for help before I called hospice. Not after. Before. Ryan shook his head immediately. "No, he was trying to slow you down. I'm telling you what I remember." And I'm telling you what he told me. That was the first useful sentence either of us had said in several minutes. We stopped arguing about whose memory was more accurate because the conflict was suddenly narrower than that. Ryan believed Dad had opposed me. I remembered Dad asking me to help carry out something Mom already meant. Both versions could not describe the same role for him. I asked Ryan one final question. Did Dad ever tell you that Mom talked to him about stopping treatment before she talked to me? Ryan frowned. Not that I remember. It was not proof of anything. Memory was messy, especially around death. Dad had been right about that much. But I no longer wanted another broad family argument about whether I was too harsh or Ryan was too emotional. Those questions could go on forever and still leave the central fact untouched. I needed chronology. Who knew what and when? I left the coffee shop shortly after noon. Ryan stayed behind, staring at the lid of his cup. We had not repaired anything between us. He still believed I had pushed too hard. I still believed he had spent years using Mom as permission to treat me with contempt. But something important had changed. For the first time, I understood the structure of the story he believed, and I knew exactly which beam I needed to test. On the drive to Dad's house, I kept repeating one sentence, so I would not let him drag me into everything else. Did Mom tell you she wanted to stop treatment before you asked me to handle hospice? Not whether I had been kind, not whether Ryan had been 19, not whether grief made people remember things differently. Just that. I parked outside Dad's house and turned off the engine. The remains of yesterday's Christmas lights were still glowing faintly in the front window, even though it was early afternoon. For a moment, I sat with my hand on the door handle. Then I got out. This time, I was not going to ask what happened. I was going to ask when. Dad opened the door before I knocked twice. He was still wearing the same gray sweater from Christmas morning, one sleeve pushed to his elbow. The house smelled faintly of cold roast and coffee. Through the dining room doorway, I could see the table still extended for 4. One chair pulled back, the green serving bowl Mom used to insist on for cranberry relish half covered in plastic wrap. Dad looked past me toward the driveway. Ryan with you? No. His shoulders lowered a fraction. I knew immediately how he wanted the conversation to go. He asked whether I had heard from Audrey. He said Ryan had barely slept. He reminded me that none of this needed to happen in the family chat. I laid my coat over a chair. I'm not here about the family chat. Dad's mouth tightened. That's convenient. Maybe it was. I had already admitted to myself that I wanted to hurt Ryan when I sent that photo. But that was not why I had driven over. One sentence had rearranged 10 years of memory. I sat at the kitchen table, while Dad stayed standing, and asked the chronology question exactly as I had rehearsed it. Had Mom told him she wanted to stop treatment before he asked me to handle hospice? He did not look confused or search his memory. He turned toward the counter, picked up an empty mug, and said Elaine had been exhausted, that all of us had been exhausted, that there had been doctors, changes, good days, and bad days. None of it answered the sequence. I asked once more whether she had told him before he asked me. He set the mug down. You handled hospice, Mara. The words were true and useless at the same time. I had handled calls. I had written down names. I had sat at this table with forms in front of me while Dad moved from room to room and Ryan argued that discussing hospice meant surrendering. I had done practical things because practical things could be completed. Grief could not. I told him I knew what I had handled. I wanted to know what he knew before I handled it. Dad finally sat across from me and retreated to the idea that everyone remembered that week differently. He was using memory as fog. I refused to debate grief in general and asked one last time, "Did Mom tell you first?" He looked toward the dining room instead of at me. The silence pulled something loose in my memory. Not a whole scene. Pieces. Mom asleep in the bedroom. Ryan gone after another argument. A legal pad full of phone numbers. Dad standing near the counter with both hands pressed flat against it. She means it this time. Then, help me. At 22, I had heard those words as a task. Mom meant what she was saying. Ryan would not accept it. Dad could not get through to him. I was supposed to help move us from terror to logistics. I reminded him that he had asked me to help, that he had said she meant it, and Ryan would not listen. Dad did not quite deny it. He said we had all asked each other for help, then added that I had always been better at doing what had to be done. It should have sounded like a compliment. It did not. I thought of the years since Mom died, all the softer versions of the same accusation. Too practical, too blunt, too willing to leave, too quick to stop pretending a bad situation was fixable. Somewhere along the way, strength had become evidence against me. Dad seemed to see where my mind had gone. Don't turn one conversation into a verdict. That's exactly what I'm trying not to do. He stood again, carried the empty mug to the sink, then said Ryan had been 19, as if the number itself should settle something. I reminded him that I had been 22. Dad said I had been different. When I asked what that meant, he kept his back to me and said, "You don't know what that week did to him." I told him I had been there. He said I had seen Ryan angry, not everything that followed. The answer finally moved away from general grief and towards something specific. I asked what he had seen. Dad turned around. "I was trying to get both of you through it." When I asked how, he did not answer. The old version of me would have filled the silence. I would have argued until he accused me of interrogating him, then said something sharp enough to make the entire conversation about my tone. So I stayed quiet. Dad finally said Ryan had been losing his mother while I was already making calls, talking to nurses, organizing things. To Ryan, I looked as if I were moving forward, while he was still trying to understand what was happening. "That explains what he saw," I said. "It doesn't explain what you told him." His eyes sharpened. "Why are you doing this now?" "Because yesterday he told me you tried to stop me." Dad looked away. "And you still won't tell me whether that was true." He pushed his chair in. "Your brother's marriage may be over. Audrey won't answer him. Kelsey wants nothing to do with him. And now you want to drag your mother's last days into the middle of it. Ryan dragged Mom into it. I'm asking why he thinks you were on one side and I was on the other." Dad's patience cracked, because that is how it felt to him. "That's not the same as what happened." "No, it's what he survived." The sentence sat between us. Not an answer, but not nothing. His evasions made one thing clear. Dad was not defending a clean chronology. He was protecting some part of Ryan's memory, though I still did not know what Dad had said, why he had said it, or what correcting it would cost him. Accuracy was no longer the only thing governing his answers. That did not make me feel vindicated. It made me uneasy. If Dad had shaped the story to protect Ryan, what had he been protecting Ryan from? I did not ask that yet. I went back to the hinge. "Did Mom tell you before she told me?" Dad closed his eyes briefly. "I'm done with this conversation." I stood. "Fine." He looked surprised that I stopped. I picked up my coat, then remembered something practical. Dad had not texted me the hospice contact information in 2016. He had emailed it. He had been using his work computer that week and had forwarded me a name, a number, and something about Mom. I remembered opening it on my laptop while sitting on the floor outside her bedroom. My Gmail account was the same one I had used in college. I had never deleted the archive. Dad saw something change in my face. "What?" "You emailed me the hospice contact." He went still. That reaction did not tell me what the email said. It only told me I had not invented the memory. "Mara, leave it buried." It was the worst possible thing he could have said. If he had laughed and told me to search all I wanted, I might have wondered whether I was chasing a ghost. Instead, he had just given an old email more weight than anything else in the room. I opened the front door. Dad said my name behind me, tired and warning at the same time. I did not turn around. By the time I reached my car, the question had changed. I was no longer asking whether Dad remembered that week differently from me. I wanted to know what he had written while the week was still happening. At home, I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter and signed into Gmail. Years of ordinary life loaded in front of me, work, receipts, travel confirmations, birthday coupons, old conversations. I clicked the search bar and typed hospice, then Dad's email address. For half a second, the page stayed blank. Then a thread from 2016 appeared near the top of the results. The subject line was simple: Mom Hospice Contact. I stared at the date. Before I opened it, I checked the timestamp once more. It was from before the fight Ryan had spent 10 years blaming on me. I clicked the thread. For a moment, Gmail showed nothing dramatic at all. Just Dad's old work address, my college-era account, and a subject line that looked painfully ordinary beside everything I now knew it carried. The first message had been sent 3 nights before the kitchen fight Ryan remembered so clearly. That mattered before I even read the body. It meant Dad had written to me while Mom's decision was still being discussed inside the house, not months later after grief had begun sanding the edges off everyone's memories. The email was short. Dad had never been a long message person. He wrote that Mom had told him again that evening that she did not want another round of aggressive treatment. He said he had told her he understood. Then came the part that made me stop breathing normally. Ryan would not hear it from him right now. Could I talk to Ryan the next day? Dad had included the hospice intake number and asked me to call to find out how a consultation worked. Near the end, he added that the decision had to remain Mom's, not ours. I read it once. Then again, slower. Again. Mom had told him again. Not maybe. Not she seemed tired. Not a vague impression Dad could later blame on my interpretation. She had already told him what she wanted, more than once, and he had answered her directly. I understand. The email did not say Dad wanted Mom dead. It did not say hospice had already accepted her. It did not authorize me to make a medical decision for her. It did something much simpler, and for me, much more devastating. It fixed the order of events. Mom had spoken to Dad. Dad had understood. Dad had asked me to help with the conversation Ryan would not hear from him, and to contact hospice about a consultation. I scrolled down and found my reply. I had written that I would call in the morning and ask what the process was, and that Mom could decide what she wanted after she understood the options. Reading my own 22-year-old words was strange. They were efficient, almost clipped. No heart emoji, no comforting sentence for Dad, just logistics. I could see the person Ryan remembered in those lines, the sister who could discuss hospice as if it were another task on a list. That realization hurt, but it no longer meant what it had meant an hour earlier. For 10 years, I had mixed 2 questions together because everyone around me had mixed them together. Had I handled those days with enough kindness? And had I caused Mom's decision? The answer to the first question was complicated. The answer to the second was sitting on my laptop screen. No. I had called because Dad asked me to call after Mom had already told him what she wanted. I had spoken harshly to Ryan because he refused to accept a decision that had already been made by the person whose body was carrying the cost. I could regret the harshness without rewriting the sequence. That distinction landed harder than vindication. Vindication would have been easier. I wanted a clean-feeling anger, triumph, even relief. Instead, I sat at my kitchen counter with my hands flat beside the laptop and felt 10 years rearranging themselves by inches. I remembered standing between Ryan and Mom's bedroom door and telling him he could not keep making her defend herself. I had hated that memory because his face had looked so young when I said it. I remembered telling him Mom did not owe us another treatment. I had hated that too. Somewhere along the way, I had treated those memories as evidence that maybe Ryan's larger accusation was true. Maybe the reason I had sounded so certain was because I had been the one pushing the decision forward. The email changed that. My certainty had not created Mom's choice. It had come after it. Dad had known that. I leaned back and looked at the subject line again. Mom Hospice Contact. Ordinary words. No confession hidden inside them. No grand secret. Just a record made before anyone knew we would spend the next decade fighting over what happened. Then I thought about the family messenger group. It was still sitting open on my phone, The same thread where Dad had told me not to come to Christmas. The same place Ryan had called me a loser. The same place Dad had watched the affair explode and immediately asked why I had done it in front of everyone. My first impulse was so quick it embarrassed me. Screenshot. Sin. I imagined Ryan seeing Dad's words beneath the timestamp. I imagined typing one sentence under it. Still think Dad tried to stop me? I imagined Dad watching the version he had protected collapse in the same group where he had helped humiliate me the day before. The thought felt good. That was the problem. I picked up my phone anyway and took a screenshot of the email. My thumb hovered over the messenger icon. For years, whenever Mom came up, I had been expected to defend myself against a conclusion I could never quite reach. Ryan had facts I could not disprove because they were also my facts. I called hospice. I argued with him. I moved quickly. Dad stayed quiet. Now I've finally had something created before the fight, before the funeral, before 10 years of blame. I wanted them to see it at the same time. I wanted the correction to be as public as the insult. Before I could send anything, I called Dad. He answered on the second ring. I found it, I said. There was no need to explain what I meant. His silence told me that. I said the subject line aloud. Then I told him the timestamp. I summarized the part where Mom had told him again that she did not want another round, the part where he said he understood, and the part where he asked me to speak to Ryan and call hospice intake. Dad did not claim the email was fake. He did not say I was reading it wrong. He said, "Mara, don't do anything with that right now." Anything? Don't turn this into another explosion. The phrase irritated me because it tried to move the conversation back to my behavior before we had even dealt with his. I asked whether the email was accurate. He exhaled. It was 10 years ago. That isn't an answer. You know what that week was like. I know what you wrote. Another pause. I looked at the screenshot on my phone. The messenger icon was still one tap away. What are you afraid Ryan will see? I asked. Dad's voice changed. Not louder, smaller. He doesn't need this right now. There it was again. Not I was mistaken. Not you misunderstood me. Ryan doesn't need this. I asked, why? Dad answered with Ryan's current crisis, Audrey gone, no sleep, a marriage in pieces, as if that made the chronology less true. He said reopening a 10-year-old wound now would only add damage. I reminded Dad that Ryan had opened it himself when he used Mom to call me destructive. He was angry, Dad said. So was I when I sent the photo. You didn't let that excuse me. He went quiet. For a second, I almost pushed harder. I almost read every line of the email back to him and demanded he explain why Ryan believed the opposite. But that question was bigger than the document. The email could tell me what Dad had known then. It could not tell me what he had said after the funeral or why. So I asked one final thing. If the email says exactly what I just read, why are you asking me not to send it to Ryan? Dad's answer came immediately. Don't send that to Ryan. Nothing else. The fear in those 5 words changed the center of the story again. Until then, I had been trying to prove the past. Now I knew the chronology. What I did not know was why Dad needed Ryan not to know it. I ended the call without promising anything. The screenshot remained on my phone. So did the family chat. I could have posted it in less than 5 seconds. I could have watched another truth detonate and told myself that whatever happened afterward belonged to the people who had lied. My finger hovered over the screen. Then a new message appeared before I made the choice. It was from Audrey. For one second, I assumed she wanted details about Kelsey, or that she had finally decided to blame me for what happened at Christmas. Instead, she asked if we could talk. She said she had already learned enough about Ryan and did not want another explanation of his affair. Her next message made me lower the phone. There's something I need to say to you. Not about the fact that Ryan cheated. About what you did with the truth. Audrey did not ask to meet in person. She called me the next afternoon from wherever she was staying, and the first thing I noticed was how tired she sounded. Not dramatic, not shattered. Tired in the flat, careful way people sound when they have spent too many hours answering questions they never expected to ask. She told me she had left the house on Christmas night and had not gone back. She had taken enough clothes for a few days and was staying somewhere Ryan did not know. She had spoken to Kelsey once more, privately, only long enough to compare the parts of Ryan's story that mattered. There was no new mystery hiding inside the affair. Ryan had lied to both of them. Audrey knew enough. She had not decided what she was going to do about the marriage, and she was not asking me to help her decide. She also confirmed the pre-Christmas setup. After I questioned Ryan about Kelsey, he told her I was jealous, bitter, and likely to cause family drama. She believed him and asked Dad not to invite me if I planned to accuse Ryan at dinner. That took away the defense I had quietly prepared. I had expected anger about the photo. I had expected her to accuse me of destroying her marriage. I had even expected some version of Dad's argument that Ryan was wrong, but I had made everything worse. Instead, Audrey said she wanted me to understand one thing. You were right about him, but you didn't do that for me. The sentence landed harder than if she had shouted. I looked across my kitchen at the laptop where Dad's old email was still open. The screenshot was still on my phone. 24 hours earlier, I had been thinking about sending it to the family group because I wanted the correction to be public. Now Audrey was reminding me what public truth had felt like from the other side. I did not defend myself. I told her the truth. I had already admitted privately. When I sent the picture, I was angry. I had been banned from Christmas dinner. Ryan had called me a loser, and I wanted to hurt him. I had known there was a chance Audrey would discover something terrible in front of other people, and I had pressed send anyway. Audrey was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, I needed to know. I just didn't need to find out like that. There was no argument available to me. I told her I was sorry for the way I had done it. I did not apologize for refusing to protect Ryan's lie, and I did not pretend the family chat had been some noble act of concern. Audrey did not tell me she forgave me. I did not ask her to. What changed was smaller and more useful than forgiveness. Until that call, I had been treating truth like a substance that became clean the moment it was accurate. If I was factually right, then whatever happened when I exposed it belonged to the liar. Audrey had just shown me the weakness in that logic. Ryan was responsible for cheating. He was responsible for lying. But I was responsible for choosing an audience when I could have chosen a conversation. When we hung up, I picked up my phone and opened the screenshot of Dad's email again. The impulse to post it in the group was still there, but it no longer felt like justice. It felt familiar. I could picture exactly what would happen. Dad would feel cornered. Ryan would feel humiliated. The old argument about Mom would become family entertainment for people who had not lived it. And I would get the one thing I had wanted on Christmas afternoon. Everyone watching the person who hurt me lose control of the story. That was not the same thing as accountability. I deleted the draft I had started beneath the screenshot. Then I saved the email itself and closed the family chat. If Ryan had built 10 years of contempt around a version Dad gave him, Ryan needed to see the evidence. Dad needed to answer for what he had done. Nobody else needed front row seats. That decision should have calmed me. Instead, it made what came next feel more serious. I called Dad. He answered with a cautious hello, as if he had been expecting another detonation. I'm not posting the email in the family chat, I said. The relief in his breath was immediate. Then I added, but Ryan is going to see it. The relief vanished. Dad said my name in the same warning tone he had used at the door. He told me I was choosing the worst possible time. Ryan's marriage was falling apart. Audrey was still gone. He had barely slept. Dad said, "Isn't that enough for one Christmas?" I leaned against the kitchen counter and looked at the dark messenger icon on my phone. That's the same argument you made yesterday. No, it isn't. It is. Someone else is hurting, so I'm supposed to carry the part that makes him feel better. Dad went silent. I did not know yet exactly what he had told Ryan after Mom's funeral. I did not know what he had been trying to protect him from, but I knew what he wanted now. He wanted the email to remain information only I possessed, because as long as Ryan did not see it, Dad could continue treating the contradiction as a private disagreement between two memories. He said reopening Mom's last days would not repair Ryan's marriage. He said dragging 10-year-old grief into a fresh betrayal would only multiply the damage. His tone was not cruel. That almost made it harder. He sounded like a man pleading for fewer fires. But I had spent too long being asked to stand in the smoke because other people did not want to look at who struck the match. "I'm not sending it to punish him," I said. Dad laughed once, without humor. "You expect me to believe that after Christmas?" The question hurt because 2 days earlier the answer would have been no. "I wanted to punish him then," I said. "I'm not pretending I didn't." "This is different." "How?" "Because he is the person who has lived with the wrong story. He gets to see the thing that changes it." Dad told me Ryan was not in a place to hear it. I asked, "When will he be?" He had no answer. That was the trap in Dad's version of mercy. There was always a person too fragile, a holiday too important, a crisis too fresh, a family moment too delicate for the truth. Delay sounded compassionate until it lasted 10 years. I told him I was not asking permission. He said, "Mara, leave your mother alone." For a second, anger rose hot enough to erase everything Audrey had just taught me. I wanted to tell him he was the one who had used Mom as cover. I wanted to send the screenshot to everyone, just to prove he could not order me back into silence. Instead, I said, "I am leaving Mom alone. I'm dealing with what the living did after she made her choice." Dad did not answer. I ended the call. For several minutes, I sat without touching the phone. I wanted to be certain I was not simply giving revenge a cleaner name. Then I opened Gmail. I forwarded Dad's old email directly to Ryan. No family group, no Audrey, no Kelsey. No caption about what a liar Dad was. I wrote only, "Read the timestamp." Then read what Dad said Mom had already told him. Compare it with what he told you after the funeral. My thumb rested over send. Once I forwarded it, Ryan could not unknow it. Dad could not keep two separate versions of the past running in two separate conversations. Whatever happened next would not be about whether my memory was reliable. Ryan would have the same words I did, written while Mom was still alive. I sent it. Nothing happened immediately. That was almost worse. I made coffee I did not want. I washed a mug that was already clean. I carried the phone from the kitchen to the couch and back again. I refused to open the family chat. If Ryan wanted to yell at me, he could do it directly. 23 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Ryan had replied to the forwarded email. The first message was only 3 words. "Is this real?" I answered, "Yes." A few minutes passed. Then, "Why didn't I ever see this?" I typed a response, deleted it, and forced myself not to answer a question that belonged partly to Dad. I wrote, "Ask him." Ryan did not respond for nearly an hour. When he finally did, the message was longer. He said he had checked the date 3 times. He remembered the fight that came afterward. He remembered me calling hospice. He remembered Dad telling him, after Mom died, that he had wanted more time and I had pushed everything forward. The email did not fit the version he had carried. I could feel the old temptation returning to tell him I had been right, to make him say it. I did neither. I waited. Another message appeared. "Why would Dad write that if he was trying to stop you?" I still did not answer. Then Ryan sent the question that changed the stakes from memory to betrayal. "Why did Dad tell me he tried to stop you?" I did not answer Ryan's question right away because anything I said would have been a guess. The email proved what Dad had known while Mom was still alive. It did not prove what he had told Ryan after the funeral, or why he had told it that way. Ryan called less than 5 minutes later. His voice was quieter than it had been at the coffee shop, but the quiet was not calm. It sounded like someone trying to hold 2 incompatible pictures in his head without letting either one fall. He started looking for an exit. Maybe Dad had written that email only to keep Mom calm. Maybe "I understand" had meant he understood what she was saying, not that he agreed. Maybe I had taken the hospice number and pushed far beyond what Dad expected. Maybe the email captured one moment and Ryan remembered what came after. I told him the part I could defend and the part I could not. Dad's email did not prove I had been gentle. It did not prove I had never pushed Ryan. I had pushed him hard to stop trying to reopen a decision Mom had already made. I had called hospice intake. I had written down questions. I had stood between him and Mom's bedroom because she was exhausted and did not want to argue again. I had said things that still made me wince 10 years later. But none of that changed the order. Mom had spoken to Dad first. Dad had told her he understood. Dad had asked me to help because Ryan would not hear it from him. Whatever else happened, the old story that Dad had been trying to stop me while I forced hospice on everyone no longer fit the record. Ryan did not argue for several seconds. Then he asked, "So you're saying I made it all up?" "No." That answer seemed to surprise him. I said I believed he remembered the fights. I believed I sounded controlling. I believed he heard me talk about hospice before he was ready to hear the word. I even believed that, from where he stood at 19, I looked frighteningly certain while everything he loved was falling apart. What I did not believe anymore was that certainty had created Mom's decision. I could hear him breathing through his nose. He was angry, but the anger had changed targets. It no longer had one clean direction. I told him something I should have said years earlier without attaching a defense to it. I was sorry for how I had spoken to him during Mom's last weeks. Not for helping Mom carry out what she wanted. Not for contacting hospice. Not for refusing to let him pressure her into another argument. I was sorry that I had sometimes used anger where compassion might have reached him better. At 22, I had treated his refusal to accept reality as a problem to solve. I had been exhausted, terrified, and furious at the disease, and Ryan had been the closest person still fighting a battle Mom had already decided to leave. I had made him the target of some of that fury. "I told you someone had to be the adult," I said. "I remember that." Ryan gave a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah, I remember too." "I shouldn't have said it." Another silence. Then Ryan said something I had never heard him say before. The last real fight he had with Mom had not been with me in the room. He had gone into her bedroom after dinner and started again about another oncologist, another hospital, another trial he had found online. Mom told him she was tired. He told her tired was not the same as done. She asked him to stop. He kept going until she finally said she did not want to spend whatever time she had left being treated like her fear belonged to everyone else. Ryan had answered with the cruelest thing he could find. He told her that maybe she was giving up, because giving up was easier than watching the rest of them fight for her. Then he walked out. The next morning, she was weaker. Within days, hospice had moved from discussion to an actual care plan. Not because Ryan's words caused it, he knew that now. But 19-year-old Ryan had not known how to separate sequence from guilt. After Mom died, he replayed that fight until it became evidence against himself. He wondered whether she had hurt his anger and decided her family would be better off if she stopped fighting. He wondered whether leaving the room had been the moment he failed her. I sat down on the edge of my couch while he spoke. Suddenly Dad's phrase from the kitchen made more sense without yet explaining what he had done. "You don't know what that week did to him. Ryan told me he had barely slept after the funeral. He kept telling Dad he should have stayed in Mom's room. He should have apologized sooner. He should have found another doctor. He should have known how close the end was." Then Dad gave him a different line to hold. I had taken over. Dad had wanted more time. Things had moved because I pushed them. Ryan said that version had not erased his guilt, but it had changed its shape. If I was the person who pushed the family toward hospice, then maybe his last fight with Mom had not mattered as much. If Dad had wanted to keep fighting too, then Ryan had not been childish or selfish for refusing to accept her decision. He had simply been the son who cared enough to keep trying. The version had changed how Ryan understood his own guilt, but neither of us yet knew whether Dad had intended that result or simply let it stand afterward. I felt no triumph hearing that. I had wanted an explanation for why Ryan believed something untrue. I had not expected the answer to include a 19-year-old boy trying to survive the memory of his last cruel words to his mother. But compassion did not require me to accept what came after. "You were 19 then," I said. "You haven't been 19 for 10 years. He went quiet. I reminded him of Christmas. Audrey and Kelsey had compared stories, and the affair became undeniable. His first response to me had not been, "I lied to my wife." It had been, "How could you do this to your own family?" Ryan did not interrupt. I said that was the same move in a different shape. When the truth became unbearable, he found the person who had exposed it and made her behavior the center of the injury. For a while, all I heard was the faint hum of his side of the phone. Finally, he said, "Dad did that first." "Maybe," I said, "but you kept doing it." He did not like that. I could hear it in the way he inhaled. Yet he did not retreat to the old argument about Mom either. That mattered. He asked what I wanted from him now. I said I did not want an apology manufactured because he had seen one email. I wanted Dad to answer the missing questions in front of both of us. No separate calls, no version for me, and a softer version for Ryan. No changing the subject to Audrey, Christmas, or my tone. We reduced it to 4 things. When did Mom first tell Dad she wanted to stop aggressive treatment? What did Dad tell her? What exactly did he ask me to do? And after the funeral, what exactly did he tell Ryan about me? Ryan was quiet long enough that I thought he might refuse. Then he said, "Okay." The word changed more than I expected. For 10 years, Dad and Ryan had occupied one side of the family story whenever Mom came up. I was the difficult one, the hard one, the one who had pushed too far. Ryan saying "okay" did not make him my ally. It did something more precise. For the first time, he was willing to stand beside me in front of Dad and ask for one shared version of the facts. Ryan called Dad while I stayed on the line. Dad answered quickly. Ryan told him we needed to talk about Mom. Dad immediately said this was not the time, that Audrey had still not come home, and everyone needed space. Ryan did not argue about his marriage. He told Dad he had seen the email. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I could hear the old clock in my own kitchen. Dad asked where he got it. Ryan said, "Mara sent it to me." Dad said my name like an accusation, but Ryan cut him off. Not angrily. That almost made it more startling. He said he was done hearing things separately. Dad tried one last route. He told Ryan they could talk privately, father to son. Ryan looked at the email again and said no. Then he said, "I'm coming over. Mara is coming too." Dad's answer came after a long pause. "Then don't expect me to say what you want to hear." Ryan and I arrived at Dad's house within a minute of each other. I had expected the drive to settle me, but by the time I parked, my hands were tight around the steering wheel. Ryan got out without looking at me, the forwarded email still open on his phone. We were not walking in as repaired siblings. We were 2 people who had spent 10 years arguing from opposite sides of the same story and had finally discovered that one person had been allowed to hear both versions. Dad opened the door before either of us knocked. He looked first at Ryan, then at me, and I saw calculation pass over his face, not how to lie exactly, but how to contain the conversation. He let us in and immediately asked if Ryan wanted to talk in the den. Just the 2 of them. Some things between a father and son did not need an audience, he said. Ryan did not move. He told Dad that was the problem. Every important conversation about Mom had happened in pieces, with one version reaching him and another reaching me. He was not doing that again. I said nothing. Ryan, choosing to stay in the same room with me, changed the balance more than any argument I could have made. We sat in the living room. Ryan placed his phone on the coffee table with the email visible and pointed to Dad's old work address and timestamp. "This is yours, right?" Dad stared at it, then said yes. Ryan asked if the words were his, too. Dad said they were. That was all we needed from the email. We did not read it aloud again. It had already settled the order. Mom told Dad she did not want another aggressive round. Dad told her he understood, and Dad asked me to speak to Ryan and call hospice intake about a consultation. Dad tried once to say one email could not capture an entire week. Ryan stopped him without raising his voice. The week was no longer the question. The chronology was settled. The room went quiet because Dad no longer had "memories are complicated" available as an answer. Ryan picked up his phone but did not look at the email. He looked at Dad. What he wanted to know now was why the story after the funeral had sounded so different. Dad asked what exactly Ryan thought he remembered. Ryan described the night after the funeral, when the house was full of flowers and food nobody wanted. He had asked why hospice happened so quickly. Dad had told him he wanted more time, but I had already taken over and pushed everything forward. Ryan repeated the meaning carefully. Dad had made himself the parent who wanted to hold on, and me the person who moved everyone toward the end. Dad objected to the wording. He did not remember saying "forced," and he had never meant Mom had no choice. Ryan did not chase semantics. "Did you tell me you wanted more time, and Mara had already taken over?" Dad rubbed a hand over his face. "He said grief made people say things badly." Ryan asked again, "Did you tell me that?" Dad finally looked at him and said, "Yes." Dad tried to salvage one distinction. He said I really had taken over the logistics because he could barely function. Ryan nodded, but this time he separated the action from the meaning. "She took over because you asked her to," he said. "That's not the same as you fighting her." Dad had no answer to that. The old phrase still described what I did, but it no longer proved what Ryan had believed it proved. I had imagined that admission many times since finding the email. In those imagined versions, I felt vindicated. The real thing felt colder. For years, I had treated Ryan's resentment as something that grew out of fear and hardened because Dad would not correct it. Now Dad had admitted he supplied the sentence Ryan built around. Ryan had not simply misread a quiet father and a forceful sister. Dad had given him language that rearranged the roles. I watched Ryan absorb that. His expression did not soften toward me. It tightened toward Dad. He asked why Dad had never told him, even once, that Mom had already said what she wanted before I made the calls. Dad said he thought Ryan knew. Ryan shook his head. For years he had described me as the one who pushed hospice and made painful things final before everyone else was ready. Dad had heard him and never said, "That is not what happened." Ryan's voice stayed controlled, but the next part cost him. He told Dad that the funeral night sentence had not remained one sentence. It became a way of understanding me. Hospice meant Mara pushes. Mara pushes meant Mara does not know when to wait. Then it became Mara gives up on people. Mara walks away. Mara makes bad situations worse. When he reached Christmas, he looked down at his hands. By the time he called me a loser in the family chat, he was using a conclusion he had spent years rehearsing. Dad stiffened and said he could not be held responsible for every cruel thing Ryan had said as an adult. Ryan agreed. He said Dad was not responsible for the word loser. He was responsible for giving a grieving 19-year-old a story in which blaming his sister made more sense than the facts Dad already knew. Ryan added that he had chosen to keep using that story long after 19, and that part belonged to him. The admission was small, but it changed the room. For the first time, neither man could place the entire history on me. Dad went to the window. He said he had never wanted Ryan to hate me. Families did not survive grief by keeping perfect records of every sentence. I almost answered, but I remembered Audrey's voice and my decision not to turn truth into another performance. Ryan responded instead. This was not about a perfect record, he said. It was about Dad knowing one thing while allowing him to believe another. Dad said he had been trying to keep the family together. Ryan asked how telling him I had taken over was supposed to do that. Dad returned to the same fact he had used with me. Ryan had been 19, angry, exhausted, impossible to reach. None of us understood what that week had done to him. This time, Ryan did not accept the sentence as protection. I was there. I know what it did to me. Dad turned from the window and looked at him differently. Something in his face shifted from defense to fear. He referred to Ryan's last fight with Mom. Ryan had walked out after saying things he regretted, and after she died, he had been in worse shape than I ever saw. I felt the edge of an answer without hearing it, Dad was finally naming what Ryan had carried after Mom died, but he still had not explained why he had given Ryan a story that contradicted what he knew. He said I had been practical then. I made calls, handled details, kept moving. Ryan had been collapsing. Dad said he was trying to get both children through the same loss, even though we were falling apart in opposite directions. That still left the central act untouched. Dad had admitted the email was real. He had admitted telling Ryan he wanted more time while I had taken over. The only unanswered question was why those truths had been allowed to coexist. I asked it once. If you knew the email was true, why give him the opposite story? Dad said it was not that simple. He had never told Ryan Mom did not choose hospice. He had never claimed I forced doctors to do anything. I told him I was not accusing him of that. I was asking why he placed himself on one side of the choice and me on the other, when he knew he had already told Mom he understood. Dad's shoulders sagged. Ryan was 19. He had just walked away from your mother after a terrible fight. You don't understand what he looked like after she died. Ryan leaned forward. Then tell me why. Dad sat down slowly, as if the question had finally made standing impossible. At last, he stopped trying to separate us, correct a word, or move the conversation toward family peace. He looked only at Ryan, because after your mother died, you were already blaming yourself. Ryan's face went still. So what did you do with that? Dad did not answer right away. The silence was different now. Before, silence had been one of his tools, something he used until the person asking the uncomfortable question got tired first. This time, it looked heavier. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his wedding ring and stared at the carpet between Ryan's shoes. When he finally spoke, he did not begin with me. He began with the night after Mom died. He said Ryan had been 19 and almost frantic with guilt. He had barely slept. He kept repeating that he should have stayed in her room, should have apologized sooner, should have found another doctor. Dad had heard him ask, more than once, whether Mom might have kept fighting if their last conversation had gone differently. It did not matter that the medical reality made that impossible. Grief was not listening to medical reality. Dad was watching his son turn one terrible argument into a theory about why his mother had died. Ryan's jaw tightened. I told Mara that already. Dad nodded. He said he knew. What he said next came in pieces rather than a speech. He had been afraid Ryan would attach Mom's death to himself. He had also been afraid of what it would mean to tell Ryan the full truth. Mom had told Dad first that she did not want another aggressive round. Dad had told her he understood, and then Dad had asked me to do the part he could not face. If Ryan heard that then, Dad believed he would see both parents as giving up, while he was the only one still fighting. So Dad gave him a different shape. Not a completely invented story. That was how he had justified it to himself. I really had handled the hospice calls. I really had pushed Ryan to stop arguing. I really had moved through the practical steps faster than anyone else in the house. Dad had wanted more time emotionally, even if he had already accepted Mom's decision medically. He took those separate truths and arranged them in the most protective order for Ryan. Dad is the one who wanted more time. Me as the one who had taken over. Ryan as the son who had not failed Mom by walking out. Only the son who had been overruled. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. And where did that leave me? Dad looked at me then. He said he had thought I could take it. The sentence was not dramatic, which made it worse. At 22, I was the one making calls, speaking to nurses and telling people what Mom had asked for. Ryan cried openly. Dad disappeared into chores. I got angry and kept moving. To him, I looked strong enough to understand later, strong enough to carry one more thing. I asked, "For a while?" Dad closed his eyes. That was where the explanation stopped being about a grieving week and became about the next 10 years. He said that, at first, he truly thought he would correct Ryan once the funeral was over and everyone could breathe. Then weeks passed. Ryan repeated the story back to him. Dad had wanted more time. I had pushed hospice, and Dad let it stand because Ryan seemed less consumed by the last fight with Mom. A few months later, Ryan used the story again during an argument with me. Dad heard it and stayed silent. By then, correcting him would have required admitting that Dad had allowed the misunderstanding on purpose. A year passed, then another. Each time the story surfaced, the cost of correcting it grew. It would no longer mean saying, "I phrased something badly" when I was grieving. It would mean saying, "I heard you blame your sister. I knew why you were doing it, and I let you." I watched Dad's face as he admitted that. He did not look relieved. He looked older. He said he had kept telling himself the past was already damaged, that reopening it would only create another fight, that Ryan and I were adults and would eventually find our own way through it. But he had also benefited from the lie. As long as Ryan believed Dad had wanted more time, Dad did not have to be the husband who had looked at his dying wife and told her he understood why she wanted to stop. He did not have to own the fact that he had asked his daughter to say out loud what he was too afraid to say to his son. That was the part he had protected too, not just Ryan, himself. Ryan stood up so suddenly the coffee table shook. He walked toward the dining room, stopped, then came back without sitting. His anger had nowhere clean to go. He accused Dad of giving him a scapegoat. Dad said he had been trying to keep a 19-year-old boy from drowning in guilt. Ryan shot back that he had not been 19 for 10 years. I stayed quiet because they had finally reached a truth that did not need me to translate it. After a minute, Ryan looked at me. The anger in his face changed shape again. "It was easier to believe you did it." I did. Dad had handed him the first version, but Ryan had spent years choosing it whenever it made his own behavior easier to explain. Christmas had shown the habit was still alive. Ryan sat again. He did not apologize for 10 years in one breath. I would not have trusted it if he had. He only said, "I used it because it was convenient." Dad started to say Ryan had been manipulated by grief. Ryan cut him off. At 19, maybe. Not at 29. That was enough for the moment. Then both of them looked at me, and I realized this was the point where our family usually made the same mistake. Someone confessed, someone cried, and then the room turned toward me, as if I were supposed to decide whether everyone could be forgiven and dinner could continue. I was not going to do that. I told Ryan I had been cruel during Mom's last weeks. I had spoken to him as if fear made him stupid. I had used anger when compassion might have done less damage. I had withdrawn from him and Dad for long stretches afterward, instead of trying forever to repair a relationship that kept hurting me. And on Christmas, I had deliberately used Audrey's humiliation to hurt him back. Those things belonged to me. Then I looked at Dad. Mom's decision did not. His story after the funeral did not. Ryan's affair did not. I can own what I did without owning what you did. Nobody answered immediately. For 10 years, I had thought escape required, proving I had done nothing wrong. I no longer needed that defense. The sentence was enough. Dad sat with both hands between his knees. Eventually, he said we had all hurt each other enough. He wanted to know what happened now. His instinct was visible even before he described it. Stop digging. Start over. Find something normal to do together before the week ended. He mentioned dinner. The word almost made me laugh. 4 days earlier, I had been told not to come to Christmas dinner because my presence would ruin it. Now that the truth had become uncomfortable for Dad, a table was being offered back as proof that we could still be a family. He said we could have another dinner before New Year's, nothing formal, just the three of us, maybe Audrey too if she was willing. We could talk about something other than Mom and Christmas and start putting things behind us. Ryan did not look at me expectantly this time. That mattered. He stared at the floor and let the offer belong to Dad. I stood and picked up my coat. Dad's face tightened. "Mara, you're leaving." "Yes." We finally told the truth. That doesn't mean the consequences are finished. He asked what he was supposed to do. For once, I did not give him instructions. I had spent too much of my life being handed the difficult part because I was supposedly better at it. I told him I did not know what his relationship with Ryan would look like after that night. I did not know what mine with either of them would become. I only knew I was not going to make everyone feel better quickly enough that we could pretend the confession had repaired 10 years. Dad followed me to the entryway. His voice softened. He asked whether I would at least come back for one dinner later in the week. I put my hand on the doorknob. No, not yet. December 31 arrived without anything feeling resolved enough to deserve the word resolution. The Christmas decorations were still up in my apartment, but the week had stripped them of their promise. A strand of lights blinked over the window while I drank coffee and looked at the unopened gift bag I had bought for Ryan and Audrey. Dad's bourbon was already in a cabinet. I had stopped leaving it by the door like I was waiting for an invitation. I thought about Audrey first. We had already spoken, and I had already apologized for the way I exposed Ryan's affair. I did not need to call her again and make her carry my need to feel forgiven. I sent only one boundary. I meant what I said. I won't contact you about Ryan again unless you ask me to. I did not add anything about Dad, Mom, or the old lie. None of that belonged in Audrey's morning. She answered about an hour later. Thank you. I need space. That was all. There was a time when those words would have made me restless. I would have wanted to know whether she hated me, whether she understood why I had done it, whether she believed I was different from Ryan. This time I put the phone down. Her space did not require my explanation. Ryan called before noon. He sounded different from the man who had called me on Christmas night, demanding that I fix what I had destroyed. He was not transformed into someone gentle. He sounded embarrassed, tired, and unsure how to ask for what he wanted. Audrey had finally agreed to receive one message from him, he said. Not a call, not an in-person conversation. One message. He wanted to know if I would read it before he sent it and tell him whether it sounded like another excuse. The request hit an old nerve. 10 years earlier, Dad had handed me the hospice number because Ryan would not hear the truth from him and asked me to do what he could not face. Now Ryan wanted me to edit the hard conversation he owed his wife. The handoff felt familiar. No, I said. He was quiet. I told him I was not going to decide which details made him sound less terrible. I was not going to explain to Audrey that he was grieving, confused, scared of marriage, or damaged by our family. Maybe some of those things were true. They still did not belong between the subject and the verb of what he had done. Ryan asked what he was supposed to say. I felt the old reflex rise, the urge to organize the mess, give him a sequence, tell him where to begin. Then I remembered Dad asking the same question after his confession. What am I supposed to do? I had answered neither man. You know what happened, I said. Tell it with yourself as the person doing it. That was as much help as I gave him. He did not call me cruel or say I was abandoning him. He only said, okay. A few hours later, he texted again. He told me he had sent Audrey the message. He did not paste it for approval. He summarized what mattered. He had told her he started seeing Kelsey while he was still engaged, lied that the engagement was ending, married Audrey anyway, and kept lying after the wedding. He did not mention my photo as an excuse and did not claim Christmas had forced him into anything. He asked for no immediate answer. Ryan had done the hard part of his own disaster without handing it to me. That did not make us close, erase the word loser, or tell me what Audrey would decide. But he had told the story with himself as the person acting, instead of turning me into the ending. I wrote back, good, nothing more. Dad waited until late afternoon. His text came directly to me instead of the family group. He said there was still food in the freezer from Christmas, and he could make something simple that evening. He knew I had said not yet, but New Year's Eve felt like a terrible night for everyone to be alone. We could still have Christmas, he wrote, even if it was late. A week earlier, that offer would have carried enormous weight. A place at Dad's table had always meant something larger than dinner. It meant I had not been pushed all the way out. On Christmas Day, losing that seat had hurt enough that I turned a blurry photograph into a weapon. Now I read Dad's invitation and felt something different. I did not want to punish him by disappearing. I also did not want to reward his confession by pretending it had reset the clock. 10 years had not been repaired because he finally stopped denying what he had done when both children were standing in front of him. I answered, instead of leaving him in silence. "I'm not coming tonight. I'm not cutting you off. I'm just not ready to sit at the table and act normal." Dad typed for a long time. The indicator appeared, vanished, then appeared again. In the end, he sent only, "I understand." Whether he truly understood was no longer mine to verify. As evening settled over the windows, I found myself remembering Mom, not the hospital smell or the worst arguments, but a quieter afternoon near the end. I had sat beside her while she rested on the couch, a blanket over her legs, the room dim because bright light bothered her. By then, the hospice consultation had already been discussed. Dad knew. The doctors had explained the limits of more treatment. Mom had made her choice. For years, I had remembered that afternoon through the story that formed afterward. I was the daughter who made it happen. I was the one who could say hospice out loud, who called, organized, and pushed Ryan back when he tried to reopen the decision. Because those actions were mine, I had slowly let myself believe the responsibility beneath them might be mine too. Now the memory held its proper shape. Mom had chosen. Dad had understood. I had helped carry the choice into practical life. And I had done some of that carrying badly. I could wish I had been gentler with Ryan without imagining gentleness would have changed Mom's prognosis. I could regret using Audrey's pain as revenge without pretending Ryan's affair belonged to me. I could be angry at Dad without turning him into a monster who had planned 10 years of damage. His cowardice had been ordinary enough to repeat, and that was part of what made it dangerous. At 11:30, I opened the old family messenger group. The Christmas explosion was still there. If I scrolled far enough, the photo, Audrey's questions, Kelsey's disbelief, Ryan's accusation, Dad's demand to know why I had done it in front of everyone. Nobody had written much there since. My thumb moved to the message box almost automatically. I began typing. I wrote that Mom had chosen hospice, that Dad had known, that Ryan had been lied to, that I had been blamed for 10 years. I wrote that I was not a loser, not a quitter, not the person who destroyed every painful thing she touched. The paragraph grew. For most of my adult life, I had imagined there would be one perfect explanation that could finally make my family see me accurately. The right sequence of facts, the right tone, enough honesty about my faults that nobody could accuse me of making myself a saint. I read what I had written. Every sentence was true. I deleted all of it. Not because Dad might get upset, not because Ryan might argue, not because I was afraid of ruining another holiday. The people who needed the truth already had it. Dad had admitted what he did. Ryan had seen the email and owned the part he kept choosing. Audrey knew what Ryan had done and what I had done with the truth. There was no jury left whose verdict could give me anything I did not already have. I closed Messenger. Outside, somewhere down the block, someone tested a firework too early. The sound cracked through the cold night and disappeared. My phone stayed quiet on the table. I did not go to Dad's dinner. I did not send one more explanation. I let the things that belonged to me stay mine, and I left the rest where they belonged.